Hello everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Today I'll be doing a review of the HBO MAX series Lovecraft Country, which is a 10-episode horror sci-fi fantasy series created by Misha Green based on the novel by Matt Ruff. It tells the story of an African-American Korean War vet named Atticus Freeman who returns to his home in Chicago after his father mysteriously goes missing. With the help of his uncle and a childhood friend named Letty, he tracks his location to Arden, Massachusetts, or as it's referred to in the series, Lovecraft Country, and the trio set off in a wild adventure that'll change the lives of everyone involved. Lovecraft Country is an extremely imaginative series that attempts to blend the creative cosmic horror and magical cultist elements of H.P. Lovecraft's writing by also tackling his more problematic issues such as his overt racist views. The story is told from an African-American POV during the height of the Jim Crow era and does an admirable job of blending its own mythos with real-world social issues at the time, and for better or worse includes actual historical events such as the Tulsa Race Massacre and the murder of Emmett Till. My personal opinion of this show is very mixed. There are certain aspects of it that I really liked and thought were extremely well done. For instance, some of the characters, especially Letty, are very likable, and one episode in particular stood out to me for having a really interesting and fun Indiana Jones type crypt exploration segment that was fantastic. There's a cool haunted house episode, and another I really enjoyed was the Korean War flashback episode. Throughout the series, the lead character, Atticus, or Tick, frequently calls someone in Korea, and it's always left somewhat ambiguous as to who this mysterious person is, until we get a whole episode dedicated to his past during the war, and there's a rather clever and surprising element of Korean mythology mixed into the story. This episode also stood out to me by portraying the protagonist as a much more complicated and very conflicted individual. Prior to this, Tick is shown as a mostly pure-hearted, heroic character. However, we see that during the war, this wasn't always the case, as he did some horrible things that weigh heavily on him later in the series, which gives him a depth that many other shows lack. One thing I will say about Lovecraft Country is that it does do a great job of creating multi-dimensional characters. Nearly all of the mains are never really portrayed as purely good or evil 100% of the time, but rather actual human beings who are capable of making mistakes. Tick's father is another seriously flawed character, and the strange relationship between Letty and her sister is also explored throughout the series and helps give it a sense of realistic drama. Now the things that I didn't care for as much. While I do enjoy the Lovecraft elements that do exist in the show, and I agree that in the 21st century it is impossible to overlook the man's overtly racist views, one problem I have with the show is that there really isn't all that much of his work here, aside from the cultist angle and the inclusion of some Shoggoths and an extremely brief dream sequence featuring Cthulhu at the very beginning. Although I did enjoy the references to another of my favorite stories, Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter series. The lack of Lovecraft's own creations is just one of the problems with the show, though. For one, the plot of the show is extremely convoluted and I feel had way too many unnecessary inclusions. There's a magic cult that forms the core of the plot, but then it goes off on a number of insane directions that include ghosts, vaguely demonic entities, and even time travel and the concept of parallel dimensions in a multiverse. As much as I enjoyed the Indiana Jones adventure and haunted house episodes, neither of them really pertained that much to the core plot, nor did the Korean War episode. In retrospective, I seem to have enjoyed the filler episodes much more than the core plot, which says quite a bit about my enjoyment of the story as a whole. While all of those episodes do tie into the overall plot, the portions that do is actually quite small and could have easily been weaved into the story in a much more sensible way, and the time travel multiverse thing is just insane. It feels like something from a 5th or 6th season just thrown into the first, which I suppose is how time travel works, but it felt really rushed. Unfortunately, I have not read the Lovecraft Country novel, so I'm not sure how much of this differs from the source material, although I've heard that the ending is drastically different. Also, the magic in this series is at times very unusual, to say the least. There's one part of the series when a character uses a potion to transform herself from a black woman into a white woman, and then has a relationship with a white man that is actually a white woman using the same transformation potion. While none of this is necessarily problematic in and of itself, until you get to the metamorphosis aspect. The idea is that the potion works something like how a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but they don't just suddenly sprout wings in a cocoon and fly away. During the pupal stage, caterpillars go through a process wherein they basically dissolve into goo and are reformed into a butterfly. So imagine that, but with a person, and without the cocoon to keep everything all neat and contained. So there's a scene where these two characters are having sex, while one of them has chunks of flesh falling off of her, like a scene from a Cronenberg film. And I'm just like, yeah, no thanks. Unfortunately, the same episode also has one of the best subplots in the entire show, in which Tick's niece is stalked by an incredibly creepy entity that only she can see, which is reminiscent of It or It Follows. They really covered all the It's with this one. Except for you, sorry. The series is getting a lot of critical acclaim, but for me, Lovecraft Country is a mixed bag that has many great ideas, but has trouble staying focused on which stories it actually wants to tell. So for me, Lovecraft Country Season 1 is a 6 out of 10. There have been a lot of rumblings recently about the possibility of a second season, and the ending of Season 1 does lend itself to one, albeit one that would be extremely different from the first. Despite my mediocre rating for Season 1, I would give a second season a chance, especially if it decided to narrow the focus and really develop one plot line this time around. If you're in the US, Lovecraft Country can be seen on HBO Max, and if the premise interests you and you want to check it out for yourself, I would certainly recommend you give Lovecraft Country a chance, and as always, thanks for watching.